David, I'm here.
Oh, you made it. Okay, very good. Sorry, my problem.
Yes.
Kathy is going to introduce our speakers.
Okay. Denise Lieberman, a civil rights lawyer, serves as director and general counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, a nonpartisan statewide network that works to protect the right to vote in Missouri, particularly for voters of color, low-wage workers, seniors, voters with disabilities, and other marginalized voters who face discriminatory barriers to the ballot. Denise is a nationally recognized voting rights expert who has testified on the Voting Rights Act before Congress. She recently served as director of Power and Democracy for Advancement Project National Office in Washington, D.C., a racial justice organization, and before that was legal director of the ACLU of Eastern Missouri. Denise is also faculty director of the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative at Washington University in St. Louis, where she is an adjunct professor of law and political science. Denise has been at the forefront of voting rights debates in her home state of Missouri and across the country. She has brought lawsuits challenging discriminatory photo ID laws in Missouri, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Texas, and other states, and led efforts in court to ensure Missourians could safely cast ballots during the pandemic. She is currently leading the fight to oppose photo ID requirements and other voting restrictions in the Missouri legislature. Denise also serves on multiple national voting rights task forces to advance voting reforms in Congress. In her role with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, Denise coordinates statewide nonpartisan election protection efforts in Missouri, including a formal program in mid-Missouri. Denise, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. This looks like a really fun group. So thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk about voting rights. I can tell all of you are really engaged in this work. So this is really great. I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides today, and I'm going to talk. I'm going to offer some context about what's happening on the state of voting rights nationally, as well as in particular, what's happening here in the state of Missouri. I have to tell you that I had to redo my presentation this morning, right before this event, because several key bills, including legislation to enshrine photo ID requirements and legislation to make the initiative petition process harder, passed out of the House of Representatives just yesterday, right before lawmakers went on spring break. So you will get the latest updates today, literally hot off the presses. All righty. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is a nonpartisan statewide network of voter advocates who work to protect the right to vote in Missouri, with particular focus on voters of color, low-wage workers, seniors, voters with disabilities, English plus communities, and other voters who face heightened and disproportionate barriers to the ballot, and who tend to be the targets of overt voter suppression efforts. And we undertake this mission through 4 buckets of work, including policy advocacy. So we lead in tracking voting legislation before the Missouri General Assembly, and also have some national campaigns to advance proactive voting reforms in Congress, like the Freedom to Vote Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that would affect voters in Missouri. We also undertake litigation. We coordinate and strategize strategic voting rights litigation in Missouri, both to combat discriminatory barriers to the ballot and to proactively expand access to the ballot. Voter education and engagement is our 3rd bucket of work, and this is really probably the most important. We produce a litany of palm cards and toolkits. We do trainings, and we share these with all of our partners across the state. There are at least 60 affiliated organizations with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. We are one of the largest state voting rights tables in the country and most diverse, because we know it is so critically important for people to have access to accurate and trusted information. And so we are looked on as policy experts on voting rights in Missouri. And when we can share out all the information with everybody, with all of you, we can help ensure that Missourians have the tools they need to be able to effectively advocate for their right to vote. And finally, our signature service program is that since 2006, so over 15, 16 years now, we have coordinated nonpartisan election protection efforts in Missouri. And this includes literally thousands of volunteers. I think some of you have volunteered for this before. We have attorneys who answer calls into the election protection hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE, and that is complemented by a slew of poll monitors who monitor polling places to provide information to voters and help them navigate any questions or barriers they may face. Our goal is to ensure that no voter leaves a polling place without casting a ballot, because we know if people have problems and they leave, even if they call us, they are not likely to come back. And so that immediate presence right there at the polls is so, so critical. And I have to tell you, to a T, I mean, virtually everybody that has done this volunteer opportunity has a story of at least one voter that they helped get through a hump and enabled to vote. That's really incredibly powerful. Well, our work is so busy right now, as you no doubtedly know, we are facing an assault on our right to vote like nothing we have seen since the Jim Crow era. And I actually think like nothing we've ever seen since the post-Reconstruction era after the Civil War. And the assaults are coming at all ends. And right now, more than ever, we need to build a cohesive pro-democracy movement in Missouri. And that's the reason that this coalition meets every single week. We meet every Monday. Some of you, I know, I recognize that you join these calls. We meet via Zoom every Monday at 10 a.m. We often have 100 or more people from Missouri on these calls every Monday. And really, it's a way to get all the updates on what's happening on legislation, events that are happening, partner organizations that are holding events that we can uplift and support. We need to support each other. There's truly room for everybody in this movement. And when we can support one another, we can really exponentially increase the power of our voices. So you can get on our mailing list for our action alerts. We send out alerts anytime there are bills that are coming up for a hearing in the Missouri legislature. This is really, really important, especially for those of you in mid-Missouri, because you're closer to the Capitol than our partners in St. Louis and Kansas City, who, have to, in Springfield, who have to drive like 2 hours to get to the Capitol to be able to testify. Filling those hearing rooms with individuals who support voting rights really does make a difference. So I urge you to get on our mailing list. We send out action alerts every time we get hearing updates. You can do so by emailing us at info@movpc.org. The sign up is also available right there at the bottom of your screen at bit.ly/protectmovoters. We'll take you to the sign up to get our action alerts. Before we jump into the legislation, I have to make a couple of announcements, because of course we have elections coming up on April 5th. Those are municipal elections. I saw in your announcements, you guys are already all over this, but wanted to alert you to our new voter registration palm cards that we just had printed. We have several thousand of them printed, and I left an enormous stack yesterday with Marilyn McLeod, the president of the League of Women Voters in Boone County, so that you all will have access and have plenty of these materials. So there's a bunch of these palm cards. Marilyn has these. She also has these palm cards that explain your rights to vote before election day, absentee voting, and your rights to vote on election day. Maryland has now big stacks of both of those materials. This is really helpful information. We also have produced a voter registration video. It's a half-hour long video that you can obtain freely at that website, bit.ly/MOVPC voter registration. It's a half-hour, quick and dirty, everything you need to know about voter registration and eligibility, with some particular focus on accessibility and voters with disabilities. Finally, I want to let you know that our election protection hotline will be live on April 5th for the municipal elections in Missouri. That means that attorneys will be taking those calls as you call in to provide immediate assistance. If you see anything at the polls, if you are interacting with voters that have any problems at the polls, just call us at 866-OUR-VOTE. That's 866-687-8683. And finally, if you are hoping to vote in those municipal elections before election day, there are a couple of important deadlines to keep in mind. We've already missed the voter registration deadline. That was this Wednesday. That was 2 days ago. So if you didn't, if somebody has moved and they didn't re-register, they're too late for the April 5th elections. But if you are registered and you want to vote by absentee, the deadline to request a ballot be sent to you in the mail is 5 p.m. on Wednesday, March 23rd. However, you can also vote absentee in person. If all of you are in Boone County, you'd go to the Boone County Clerk's office. I know that you work closely with Brianna and know where that is. You can do that up until 5 p.m. the day before Election Day, Monday, April 4th. All righty. With those out of the ways, let's give some context to the fight that we are in right now. And really, this fight for the right to vote is the defining fight of our era right now. Here we are coming off, last weekend was the 57th anniversary of the historic march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge that ultimately led to passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And yet, nearly 60 years, well over 50 years after Bloody Sunday, we continue to carry the fight that our predecessors before us carried for the right to vote. And this fight is all the more salient today as it was in 1965. I suggest that this quote is from Martin Luther King's "Give Us the Ballot" speech in 1957 that I think really highlights why this fight is so very important. Because we may have political views, but at the end of the day, this fight, the fight for the right to vote, is much, much bigger than politics. It's much, much bigger than Democrats versus Republicans and who's getting into office. It truly is the heart and soul of a democratic country, a democratic community. The right to vote is our voice. This fight is about acknowledging and recognizing the basic human dignity of all people, the right of people to have a say, to have a voice in their own destinies. Martin Luther King said, so long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself, because I don't have a say in my own future. Others make those decisions for me. And until all of us can have a voice in our own destinies, hold our leaders accountable, we are not truly free. Until all of us are free, none of us are. And that's why this fight falls on us. And I don't have to tell you that this is a real fight right now, you guys. The big lie and the spate of disinformation about voting that led to the violent attack on our nation's capital a year ago to literally overturn a democratically produced election has had profound consequences for our right to vote in this country and here in Missouri. You know this man. This is Missouri's own Senator, Josh Hawley, in that famous fist bump, egging on January 6th, the people who would overturn our democratic processes in this country. Shame on him. That attack spurred a continuation of the big lie and disinformation that led last year to 425 restrictive voting bills in 49 out of the 50 states. Last year alone, 34 new laws passed in 19 states. And this year in 2022, we're already at over 300 new restrictive voting bills across the country. And that is not all. This narrative has led not just to restrictive voting bills, but also efforts to undermine our confidence in the entire democratic process overall. Elections expert Rick Hasen, who is a professor at UC Irvine, he runs the election law blog and the elections center at University of California, refers to this election sabotage effort as a delegitimization of the election process itself. And we're seeing that play out in the attacks on our election processes, on our election officials. And you guys work closely, I know, with Brianna in Boone County and probably other election officials if you are outside of Boone County. And these folks have been on the receiving end of a barrage of attacks, threats, and a new report just issued this week by the Brennan Center shows that 1 in 5 election workers are considering leaving their jobs because the attacks have become so persistent. This is Brad Raffensperger. You remember him. He's a Republican. He voted for Trump. He's the Secretary of State, the chief elections official in Georgia, who again voted for Trump, but stood behind his state certification of the duly certified election results and received these death threats. On the right of your screen, you're seeing actual text messages that his wife received threatening their family. And he's not alone. Secretary of State of Michigan, Arizona also received death threats. That's why the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is joining in solidarity actions with our partners around the country, other state voting rights tables, to have mark April 12th as Thank You Election Heroes Day. And we'll be sending more information about that around, but it's really an opportunity to uplift the important work that our election officials do. And that work's becoming harder. Like I said, we've seen over 300 restrictive voting bills across the country. And this assault is not random. It's not emerging up through grassroots issues that are emerging in states. These are efforts that are directed precisely at the very voters who came out in record numbers in 2020, in spite of the pandemic, voters of color, young voters, seniors. And so we're seeing attacks on the very measures that allowed those folks to vote. We're seeing attacks on voting by mail. We're seeing efforts to enshrine discriminatory ID requirements. We're seeing efforts to make the jobs of local election authorities harder and to starve them of funds. We're seeing efforts to dismantle direct democracy in states around the country. And Missouri is not immune from this effort. But it's important to know that the kinds of bills we're seeing here are being mirrored in states around the country. That's a photo from our Voting Rights Lobby Day last year. And we've got it hard in Missouri. You all know this. I don't have to tell you this. In a state where our own chief elections official has pointed to the state of Texas, which passed what is largely considered the nation's worst voter suppression law last year, Senate Bill 1 in Texas. Missouri's chief elections official points to that as a model for Missouri. So that's what we're up against. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is tracking, in particular, 3 types of bills: measures that would enshrine photo ID, attacks on the citizen initiative process, and measures that would make voting by mail harder. So I'm going to go through each of those and give you a sense of where things are at. I will also share with you, if you'd like afterwards, links to our legislative fact sheet. We also have a legislative tracker where we keep track of all the voting bills and update it regularly, and I'll be happy to share that with you too. Okay, first up, attacks on the citizen initiative process. This is a photo from our citizen initiative lobby day last year. We will be having another citizen initiative lobby day this year on May 3rd, by the way. So what is this thing? Well, the initiative petition process really is as simple as the slide suggests at its core. This is a form of direct democracy. This is a system, and about 26 states have a form of citizen initiative, more than half the states. And this is really a process where instead of lawmakers passing laws, this is where citizens can say, hey, I've got a great idea for a law. And if enough people agree that all of us should vote on your idea, it can go on the ballot. And if a majority of Missourians agree, then the measure can become law. And this is a process that has been underway in the state of Missouri for over a century. And by the way, it has it spans the political spectrum. To be honest, this is a process that has enabled very conservative Republican groups, very liberal progressive groups, and everything in between to place proposals before voters. This process is under attack. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but here's what I want to tell you about this. This process is under attack in primarily 2 ways. We have seen well over a dozen bills. We are tracking currently over a dozen bills that would make the citizen initiative process harder for grassroots citizens, grassroots organizations in Missouri in 2 ways. Each of the bills is a little bit different, and not all of them do both of these things. But basically, the long and short of it is these bills first make it harder for citizen groups to get proposals on the ballot by increasing the number of signatures they have to get to qualify the measure for the ballot. And second, these measures, once a proposal's on the ballot, these bills would make it harder for proposals to pass by increasing the threshold, many of them by increasing the threshold from a simple majority, which is what it is now, to 2/3. In short, these measures are going to really strangle efforts at the citizen initiative process by making it too expensive. Many of the bills that increase the number of signatures proponents have to get, in some cases would increase the number of signatures by 200,000 or 300,000. That's a lot. I don't know if any of you have ever collected signatures for a ballot initiative, if you've ever stood out in front of your library or done anything like that. If you have, you know that if you got 15 people to sign in 1 hour, that was a pretty good hour. So imagine the burden of having to get 200,000 or 300,000 more signatures. Becomes incredibly costly and virtually prohibitive for many grassroots efforts that are not very, very well funded. Second, increasing the threshold to pass. You know, I think that even grade school children understand the concept of majority rules, right? Right now, it's already really hard to get initiative petitions on the ballot. I mean, even currently, you have to get several 100,000 signatures on a proposal for it to even qualify for the ballot. But once on the ballot, if a majority of the voters approve it, it passes. And that's really common sense, isn't it? If the majority of people want something, it passes. These measures would increase that threshold in some cases up to 2/3. Meaning, as a practical matter, measures that have the support of the majority of Missourians would still not go into law. And so let's just take one example that I'm sure you all care about: Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion was one of these ballot initiatives, wasn't it? I know all of you probably worked on this. There was a big effort down in Boone County, and it passed overwhelmingly in Missouri. It passed by over 60% of the vote. That would not be enough under this threshold. So this is why we are working with groups across the state to defend the initiative petition process. We're really leading this fight and kind of tracking these bills in the legislature. Our grassroots partners are building up a ground campaign, because once these measures pass, they are going to get put on the ballot, ironically, in November. And we're going to need to really educate voters around the state about why they need to vote no on this. So here's the two bills that have moved. First off, HJR 79, House Joint Resolution 79. This one has already passed out of the House and is in the Senate Elections Committee. So this one is moving and moving quickly. This proposal does both of those things I just mentioned. It increases the number of signatures that proponents have to get. So previously you had to get 8% of voters in 6 congressional districts. This would increase that. You'd have to get 10% of voters in all 8 congressional districts. And it increases that threshold to 2/3. Second, and this one's hot off the presses. Just yesterday, the Missouri House passed HJR 91, and it also got referred to the Senate Elections Committee. So we now have 2 initiative petition bills that have passed out of the House and are now in the Senate when they come back from spring break. This one also increases the number of signatures that you'd have to get to place a measure on the ballot. It also increases that threshold for passage from a simple majority to 2/3. And on top of it, it requires all citizen proposed amendments to still go to the legislature so that they can potentially amend it and vote on it, after which the citizens could determine which one they want to have submitted for the ballot. So this is, again, this really overt partisan legislative interference in the citizen ballot initiative process. So again, HJR 79 and HJR 91 are the 2 initiative petition bills that have now passed out of the House and are in the Senate. There are about a dozen others, and so it's not incomprehensible that other initiative petition bills could come up. I do want to alert you, though, that right when these folks get back from spring break, on March 23rd, there is going to be a hearing in the House Elections Committee on yet another citizen initiative petition bill And I'd encourage you to attend a House Elections Committee hearing. They meet on Wednesdays at 12 in House Hearing Room 6. If you can't, you can also submit written testimony online at the website here, house.mo.gov/all-elections. And you can see where I put that arrow. If you can't attend in person, you can also submit testimony online in the House by clicking that link that you see at house.mo.gov/all-hearings. And you'll be able to submit testimony in writing. I really can't emphasize enough how valuable it is to submit written testimony. It doesn't have to be long. It can really be really, really short. But here's why. See this photo? I was in the legislature the day that they took the floor vote on HJR 79, the first initiative petition bill. That's actually my practicum student, Julia, who's a graduate student at Washington University, who's doing her practicum with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition this semester. So we were there for the hearing. And you know what happened in that hearing? State Representative Trish Gumby, who, by the way, is running for Congress now in the St. Louis area in the 2nd Congressional District. She got up during that hearing. And you know what she did? She read from testimonies of all the people who submitted testimony online opposing this measure. And it was like one after the other after the other. And she would say, Mary from St. Louis writes this. Joe from Columbia writes this. Sam from Kansas City writes this. It was so powerful. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. And so even though I know it seems like, what's the use of submitting testimony? The votes are against us. What happened that day on the floor helped change the narrative. Because you know who else was in that hearing room? The media. And they reported on this. In addition, these testimonies are matters of public record. And so what we have now on these bills is, if you actually look at the public testimonies, there's maybe just a handful of testimonies supporting these measures, and dozens and dozens and dozens. There were over 60 pieces of testimony opposing HJR 79. That really paints an important picture about how people in Missouri feel about this. So I just say that to say it makes a difference when you submit testimony. And we're here to help you do that. Our action alerts will include a link to the actual direct link to submit testimony. I always include talking points. I include a link to the bill just to make it as easy as possible to submit that testimony. So here's the measure that's coming up next week. This coming week, they're on spring break. On March 23rd, this is another IP bill. It would propose increasing the threshold for passage of proposed constitutional amendments. And this is a bizarre one. It would require not only a majority vote to pass, but it would also require a majority vote in a majority of the state legislative districts. And what it looks to me is that this is an attempt to really kind of dilute the power of votes from some of the more populous areas. But more broadly, we know that the citizen initiative process is it's a really pure form of direct democracy. I think that's the biggest and best message that we have here. Lawmakers should not be taking steps to silence the ability of Missouri voters to have their voices heard and raise proposals before their other voters. I mean, look, already as it is, you still have to convince a majority of the voters that your idea is a good one for it to pass. We shouldn't be making it harder. The second bill that's coming up on March 23rd, so you got plenty of time, is House Bill 2633. This one has to do with voting machines. And there's just sort of one glitch with this bill. This would phase out all electronic voting machines and require hand-counted paper ballots beginning in January of 2023, next year. And the problem with this bill, and it only requires a small fix, is that it explicitly states that all the machines have to be removed, including for voters with disabilities. And so while the bill says, oh, well, voters with disabilities are entitled to assistance with marking devices, keep in mind that for some voters with disabilities, that machine is the only way they can cast a secret ballot. And so even if they have a right to assistance, right? So say I'm visually impaired, if I have to use a paper ballot, even if I have a right to assistance, somebody has to read the ballot to me, and then I have to tell that other person how I want to vote, and then that other person fills in my vote for me. Right now, those voters can use a machine with headphones and braille prompts and cast a secret ballot. This really is about dignity. And all this bill has to do is include a provision just ensuring that at least one machine would be available for these voters with disabilities. All right. Those are the two bills coming up next week, and I hope that you'll just decide to weigh in on them. So let's get back to sort of our three prongs here. The first was initiative petition. The second is photo ID. And this one is also hot off the presses. Again, just last night or just yesterday afternoon, before adjourning, they did it again. The Missouri House of Representatives passed a photo ID bill out of the House, and now it's going to the Senate. I know you guys have been involved for a long, long time, and you know this is a perennial issue in Missouri, photo ID. For the last 16 years, we have been fighting photo ID bills in the Missouri legislature. So here's what they passed out last night. They passed out House Bill 1878, along with a companion constitutional amendment, HJR 94. And again, this is literally hot off the presses. This would just happen yesterday. Here's what these bills are doing. By the way, there's also a slew of other photo ID bills, so I've listed some of those. House Bill 1878 is the one that passed, but other bills like House Bill 1646 and 2113 and Senate Bill 670 and Senate Bill 679 also have photo ID provisions. Here's what they do. I'm just going to show you a photo. This is what House Bill 1878 does. This bill eliminates forms of ID that Missouri voters currently rely upon to cast their ballots and to verify their identity at the polls, including, bizarrely, the voter notification card you get from the election authority that verifies that's the card that the election authority uses that says, I verified you are in fact a valid eligible voter for this election. I mean, it's like, what could better demonstrate your eligibility as a voter than the card that comes in the mail right before election day that the election authority is certified that you're actually eligible to vote in that election. So it would eliminate that. It would eliminate student IDs from colleges and universities like Mizzou. Really creates a barrier for our students who, who may come from other parts of the state, but they're not likely to change their driver's license information when they come to campus. They may not even be driving on campus, especially places like Mizzou. I'm in St. Louis. Washington University has polling places on campus as well. That student ID, the students use it for everything. It has really allowed students to be able to participate. That would be eliminated under these bills, leaving primarily just the kind of ID you have to get at the DMV, a Missouri driver's license or non-driver's license. And this is where the problem comes in. There's so many reasons this is a problem. So first off, not everybody can get to the DMV. In fact, not every county in Missouri even has a DMV office. There are some places in more rural parts of the state where you're going to have to go 1, 2, or 3 counties over to get to your nearest DMV office. Now think about if you don't have access to transportation. Many DMV offices are not on public transportation routes, even those that are in big cities. And why would they be? Their primary job is to deal with driver's licenses. They don't normally deal with people who don't drive. But this legislation would require those voters to go to the DMV to get a state issued ID. On top of that, DMV offices are pseudo privately franchised. And so the state really can't dictate things like training or procedures or process to ensure that all voters are getting these IDs correctly. On top of that, many of these agencies are not open evenings or weekends, making it really difficult for low-wage workers, hourly wage workers, shift workers, our essential workers who are at the hospitals right now, right? Many of whom might have to take a day off without pay just to be able to get to a DMV office that's only open bankers hours. And that's before you even get there. And we all know how much fun it is to go to the DMV and stand in those long lines when we have to renew our licenses. It's a real hassle, and it requires underlying documents. So for the over 200,000 Missouri voters who don't have one of these forms of ID, they're going to have to produce underlying documents like a certified birth certificate or Social Security. They have to prove identity, residency, citizenship. And that can be very difficult if you don't have those underlying documents. And even though this legislation says the state has to help you get that birth certificate, that doesn't help if A, it doesn't exist, or B, there are errors or problems on it, or if your name has changed since birth. That's one reason why women are disproportionately affected if they change their names due to marriage. You're going to have to bring that marriage license with you. And if you then got divorced and change your name again, you're going to have to bring that copy of that divorce decree. If you've had a court-ordered legal name change, etc. And for some people, they don't have these documents at all. I've had clients who they were victims of natural disasters. We have a bunch of Hurricane Katrina expats here in Missouri, and literally their documents were washed away. I had clients who lived in Joplin about a decade ago. Remember those tornadoes in Joplin? And one of them hit a hospital. Those records are just gone. They don't exist. And for many voters of color, especially elderly voters of color who were born in the South during segregation, guess where they were born? Not in a hospital, right? Their mothers weren't welcomed at local hospitals. They typically gave birth at home using a midwife, and not like a state certified registered midwife like we have now that files birth certificates with the state. Like a local person, the lady down the street that knows how to deliver babies, and they'd write that information in the Bible. I've had so many clients in that circumstance who just didn't have birth certificates issued. And it's very hard to get a post-dated birth certificate, especially if there are any sort of glitches or errors. And if there are glitches or errors, or even just a typo, it could result in you having to go through a bureaucratic maze, including changing your Social Security and going to court to get a court-ordered legal name change, which can cost hundreds of dollars. I've literally had this happen to a client. There was just a typo in how her name was spelled, and her name was Rosanelle, And on the birth certificate, it was as one name. On her social security, it was like Rosa was the first name and Nell was the middle name. And it just wasn't spelled the same. 10 different government agencies this 93-year-old woman had to go to reconcile that difference. That is precisely the reason that the Missouri Supreme Court has found these kinds of laws to be unconstitutional, that they impose a heavy burden on the right to vote. Now, lawmakers in yesterday's floor vote and in Monday's hearing on this said, oh, you know, it's not hard. Anybody can get an ID. And if the state's going to give you a copy of your birth certificate, it's not a problem. But it is. And the Supreme Court of Missouri recognized this as well. And just what I just shared with you was just the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of bureaucratic hassles that people are going to have to jump through under these laws. People like, that's a photo of Kathleen Weinshank, by the way, the lead plaintiff in that lawsuit. She's from mid-Missouri as well, and I think some of you know her. A lovely woman. She has cerebral palsy, doesn't drive. And these photo ID laws have a provision that if you don't have the ID, you can cast a provisional ballot that will only be counted if there's a signature match. Well, guess what? Kathleen can't duplicate her signature. Right. So that's why these laws are bad, and they discriminate against the very voters who already face the greatest hurdles to being able to exercise the ballot. These quotes are just from yesterday. So like I said, hot off the presses on the House floor yesterday, several lawmakers, including your very own Representative David Tyson Smith, spoke out against House Bill 1878. Representative Smith saying this is absolutely not necessary. Representative Peter Meredith said the point of this bill is to make voting harder. We do not have a voter impersonation problem. We have a voter participation problem, he says. And State Representative Rasheen Aldridge of St. Louis, who called out the legislation's disparate impact on voters of color, urging them to think about people who don't look like them. So that is where we're at. The photo ID bill has passed out of the House into the Senate. So that's how we're going into the second half of session. Third issue in my last few minutes are attacks on voting by mail. These bills are a little bit confusing because they tend to be part of big, larger omnibus bills, and they sort of hide how the measure would hurt some of our most vulnerable voters, including voters with disabilities and seniors. This is particularly concerning because we no longer have in place the temporary vote by mail measures that were in effect in 2020 for the pandemic. You may recall that because of the pandemic, we had some special rules that allowed anybody to vote by mail and ensured that any voter over age 65 could get a ballot by mail without having to get it notarized. That proved to be a lifesaver for so many Missouri voters. But that measure is no longer in effect. And that means voters over 65 no longer can automatically get an absentee ballot. So the bills, there's a whole series of bills. And here's in short what they do. They create a two-tiered absentee voting process that makes it easier for voters who can show up in person at the local election office, but continues to limit the ability to get a ballot in the mail. And so what these bills would do is allow no excuse absentee voting, where you don't have to provide an excuse, but only if you can show up at the election office typically only during working hours. They only have to have weekend hours that weekend before election day. And only if they present state issued photo ID, which we've already talked about who's affected by that. These bills would then separate mail voters, people who have to get ballots by mail, who would still have to provide one of these 6 excuses on this screen in order to be able to get a ballot by mail. So let's just think about this for a second. Who will not be able to get to the election office during working hours to do a ballot in person? Well, let's see. People that have to work, people, hourly workers who would only be able to get there if they took a day off without pay. Shift workers who work beyond working hours when that office is open. People who lack transportation to the election office. Elderly voters, seniors, voters with disabilities or chronic health conditions for whom making a trip to that office would be a real burden. For people who have child or elder care obligations. Those are the very people, the voters who are most vulnerable, are the voters who need to get ballots in the mail the most. And guess what? Being over 65, having a disability or a chronic health condition alone, having to work, those are not reasons that you're allowed to get an absentee ballot in the mail. So these are the very voters that would be left out in this bizarre 2-tiered system. Look, at the end of the day, I appreciate the nod to no excuse absentee voting. Missouri sorely needs it. Look at this. Missouri is way in the minority. 35 states plus the District of Columbia allow any voter to get a ballot in the mail without providing a reason. Missouri should join that list. So instead of creating this bizarre 2-tiered process that basically creates first and second class absentee voters, we know these 2-tiered systems don't work. Why not just get rid of the excuses, allow Missouri to become a no excuse absentee voting state? If lawmakers are actually serious about the no excuse absentee voting part of this bill, they keep it simple and just make it no excuse absentee voting. The other reason we know these bills are a sham, they contain provisions that say if the photo ID part of the law is struck down, which it will be because we're going to sue them again, then the no excuse absentee voting goes away too. Come on. These bills also do other things that make voting by mail harder, like make it illegal to help get absentee ballot applications for voters, make it illegal to help voters fill out absentee ballot applications. We're not talking here about the ballots themselves. We're talking about just getting applications to people. Other legislation like House Bill 1455 would make it illegal for anyone, including an election official, to distribute blank absentee ballot applications. So if Brianna comes to one of your meetings, she can't bring a stack of applications for you all. You have to officially and explicitly request an application. Again, not the ballot, just the application. Other bills we've been seeing have gone through would move us away from Missouri's open primary process by recording your political party with their voter registration or with your primary ballot record. Those bills have also been heard in the House Elections Committee this year. So I want to stop there. I think we're just at 1:15, which is when I was told I have to stop. There's a lot going on, as you can see, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. And I invite you to join us on Mondays to learn more.
Well, Denise, thank you very much. I don't, do you have time to stick around a little bit if people do want to stay longer and ask questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment while you're still on, Denise, that Kathleen Weinshank was a very long time member of this group. and she has passed away, but she has passed away within the last, help me, somebody, couple of years. Yeah. So, but anyway, we all know and love Catherine.
Miss her.
Most of us
Yeah.
know her and miss her.
Yeah. And just a really it's impressive and inspirational woman. Yeah. Thank you for raising that.
Other questions or comments for Denise?
Just thank you. Oh, Pam's got her hand up.
Denise, are there similar organizations like this in other states?
Yeah, actually there are. There are state tables in other states. I've had the opportunity to work pretty closely with some of them, including the state table in Georgia and in North Carolina. I was working with the Brennan Center last year and served as their legislative consultant that worked with the tables in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Texas, places where some of these bills are. Not every state, but a lot of states do have tables like ours. Yeah. And we do actually coordinate at the national level and have coalition meetings amongst the various state groups too, which is really interesting and a great way to kind of compare notes and talk about how our strategies for defeating these bills, since so many of them really are similar from state to state.
I see some other microphones unmuted, so please go ahead and ask your questions.
Yes, Denise, Al Plummer. What was the name of the website that you stated we could use to contact the coalition?
Yeah, let me just pull that up real quick.
I should say the address.
There you go.
Okay. Is that a website or a bit.ly/protect Mo voters?
That will take you directly to the sign up page. So you don't have to navigate anything. It'll take you right to the place to sign up for action alerts.
Do you have a
Okay.
website?
Yes, it is in the process of being revamped. If you go there now, it's going to have a lot of stuff about notary requirements, because that was the big thing in 2020. And it's movpc.org.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I'd like to first compliment you. Missouri desperately needs an organization of this type. You might have discussed it earlier. I'm sorry, I was a little late getting in. Can you say something about the strength of the organization in the state? How many people are involved? Is this, funding at an appropriate level, etc.? Yes.
Yeah, the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has been around for over 15 years. We started actually with that photo ID bill that was passed in 2006, and kind of as an ad hoc table to fight the photo ID bill. And they kept the very next year, even though we took it to court and got the photo ID bill struck down, the very next year they came back with more legislation. So we kept meeting and it got more formalized over the years. Now we have approximately 60 affiliated organizations. We have several thousand on our action alert distribution list. And we have reached all across the state. We're certainly working to build more support in more underrepresented parts of the state, especially like in Southeast Missouri and the Boot Heel, where there is just so much race discrimination going on and so many barriers in mid-Missouri, in more rural parts of the state. But we've got kind of formal leadership teams in mid-Missouri, Jefferson City, St. Louis, Kansas City, and Southwest Missouri that are already really functioning very, very well, and that coordinate the election protection efforts every election cycle. And in mid-Missouri, Sharon Schneeberger is the one who coordinates the election protection effort in Boone County.
Pam, go ahead.
You have given Marilyn McLeod a stack of those palm cards, and I imagine that she will probably have them at the table at the public library when we have our league forums. And I can talk to her also just about giving it to the library, some to the library as well. It's just the library hands out things like that as well. Would that be okay?
Oh, sure. And listen, I'm always happy to send you more if you want them. You know, I was in the Capitol all day the other day because they had hearings on in the House and the Senate on voting rights, and we had Disability Rights Lobby Day at the Capitol on Wednesday, where we had a voter registration table, and we had a lot of information about voters' rights. But I can always, these cards are for all of you, and I'll just show you again what we've got. Right, so these are the brand new voter registration and eligibility cards with some particular notes about accessibility. Marilyn has a big stack of those. We also, you know, on our action alerts, we provide links to the online versions of these cards. We also provide links to the print ready versions of these cards, so you can also just print them out yourself. I'm happy to send a print job to our local union printer in Columbia. If you want me to send have a stack printed for you. The second card, of course, is the voting rights before and on election day. The first side talks about the rules for absentee voting, and the second side talks about the rules for election day. We also have a great training on voter registration. It's 30 minutes long. It's a video. It's already done. You're welcome to just take it, play it, use it whenever you want.
Okay, thank you.
David Luthel.
Denise, what is the prospect in the Senate for the passage of these items? A lot of things pass the House and then get killed in the Senate. What is the situation as you understand it? Is that likely to be caught in the fight between the conservatives and the less conservative Republicans, or is it are they likely to put this through?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And you know, we have successfully been able to stave off legislation every year by having it stall in the Senate, and that's certainly the hope. You know, these things pass out of the House every year. You're absolutely right. The House is very quick to pass these voter suppression bills, especially the photo ID bills. They tend to go slower in the Senate. It's my hope that the Senate doesn't have the appetite for the photo ID bills this year. I think they are going to pass the initiative petition bill, though. There seems to be a lot of energy around that, and I think we will be looking at a ballot fight on the initiative petition effort. I'm hearing that they may not be quite as enthusiastic about photo ID. Sometimes what happens is they end up using the photo ID bill as a bargaining chip with other to bargain with other legislation. Like, you know, they're also going to be looking at, you know, reproductive rights and critical race theory and all those other bills that are moving on other issues as well. And sometimes photo ID gets used as a bargaining chip on for amendments on some of those other issues. So we'll see. You know what? Here's what I do know: the more we keep up the pressure, the more we make it less easy for the Senate to pass these bills. So that's why we are going to continue to show up at the Capitol. We are planning a lobby day for late April. the exact date is going to be figured out over the spring break. Really, we wanted to see what passed out of the House going into spring break to be able to kind of time that process correctly, and figure out what our focus was going to be. But now we've got both IP and photo ID have passed out of the House. So going to the Capitol, continuing to kind of talk to reporters. I do a lot of media work on this stuff, and all of you can too. I know in Jefferson City, Julie Allen has been prolifically writing letters to the editor and op-eds on this stuff, and it makes a difference. It really does, because it keeps our narrative and our issues on the forefront, and makes it less likely that they can just kind of quietly pass the measure. You know, we're going to raise a stink, and that is my hope, is that we're going to be able to stall it by doing that.
I wanted to ask, what is the person in Mid-Missouri that you mentioned actually doing? What kind of things is she actually doing?
Oh, we've got a huge group in Mid-Missouri. We've got probably at least a dozen organizations in Mid-Missouri that are part of the Mid-Missouri coalition. Yeah. So again, I only talked about who the lead who runs election protection for our Mid-Missouri team is. So we've got a huge Mid-Missouri leadership team. We've got a whole team in Boone County, and then there's a whole separate Mid-Missouri team that's focused in Jefferson City.
Oh, okay.
And so so we do, but like I said, we've got 5 regional leadership teams in St. Louis, Kansas City, Boone County, Jefferson City, and Southwest Missouri, Springfield. And we have formal, all those groups, you know, we all meet together every Monday. Like I said, there are probably a good 100 people that come to our meetings every single Monday from across the state. Those regional teams build out the voter protection work in those regions. So when we do things like our April 12th Honor Election Worker Day, we'll have sibling events, like the same activities happening in St. Louis, Kansas City, Mid-Missouri, Springfield, all at the same time, that are organized by those regional groups. And then on election day, we have those regional leads will coordinate the volunteers to monitor the polls for our election protection program. And so Sharon Schneeberger with the lead, it happens to be the Boone County election protection coordinator, and helps basically make the polling place assignments and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. Mari or Carl?
I just wanted to comment in answer to your question, Kathy. Sharon is very active in the League of Women Voters, and much of the voter protection effort has been directed toward the redistricting process. She really led that, I think.
Yeah, so she also serves on our redistricting committee. So the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has a bunch of working groups and subcommittees. So one of those is redistricting. We have about maybe 20 folks who serve on our redistricting committee, and Sharon has been one of the leaders of that committee. We have a anti-disinformation committee that has probably about 25 people on it. Jennifer Lohman chairs that committee. But we have folks across the state on that, and they work on programming and training around disinformation, which is very, very interesting. We have a language access committee that is responsible for translating all of our voter rights materials into multiple languages. We have our palm cards get translated into 6 languages: Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and Bosnian.
Wow.
Right.
Okay. David Mallory?
Thank you. Denise, you mentioned a couple times poll watchers. I've been, my wife and I have been poll workers, election judges for over 20 years. I've never heard of a poll watcher. I hear poll challengers. Is that the same thing?
No, not at all. So yeah, again, that's election protection. And so since 2006, the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has coordinated all of the nonpartisan election protection efforts in Missouri. And we typically have about 1,500 volunteers who do this. This is a two-pronged effort. The first is with this hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE. You've probably seen this hotline before. And so we have attorneys that answer all calls into that hotline. These calls are answered live on election day. So voters and our monitors can call 866-OUR-VOTE. You're talking to a local attorney right here in Missouri. We prearrange all sorts of advocacy with local election officials. This is complemented by, and so that way you can talk to an attorney immediately in real time on election day. This is complemented by our poll monitors who work for election protection. Like I said, we have about 1,500 poll monitors in Missouri, and they sign up to monitor the polling places. They all get the election protection vests. We have a big program in Boone County, so I know you've seen some of our volunteers there, and we assign them to polling places. You can sign up for as little as a 2-hour shift, and you show up there with these palm cards and are present to help voters in real time who have any questions about their rights, who have any issues or problems navigating their rights at the polls. And so those poll monitors are really, really important to ensuring that voters have the tools they need and the advocacy they need to be able to cast their ballot. And if they're experiencing any problems, the poll monitors then get on the phone with our lawyers. We send a lawyer down there. I contact Brianna in the case of Boone County, let her know that there's this problem happening. We're documenting it. If it's something that's illegal, we make a demand that it stop immediately. And if necessary, we file litigation and lawsuits on election day to correct it. But the truth of the matter is, after nearly 20 years of doing this now, the election officials are incredibly responsive. Anytime we identify a problem, they get it fixed. The whole key to election protection is getting stuff reported quickly so that it can be responded to quickly, because problems just escalate very, very quickly if they're not addressed immediately. And so we hope that you'll join and be part of our election protection effort. We will be having, in 2020, we had like 35 trainings for the program. It's really easy to sign up, and we'll have the full program going for August and November of 2022 again. And again, like I said, we have regional leaders who do those actual assignments. There's a single sign up sheet. People can attend any training they want because we'll do them on Zoom as well as in person. We record the training so you can also watch it on your own. But then we have our local leads that actually assign which polling places people are going to go to and get them their T-shirts and get them their election protection vests and materials.
Hey, Denise, this is Shaman Schwak. We met the other day in the Capitol.
Yeah,
thanks so much for this. Thanks so much for being here today. I just wanted to throw out there, and you can clarify this for me, but if any of these bills on the initiative petition process pass and they have to go to the voters, it's my understanding that they're gonna go on the primary ballot and not the November ballot. Is that correct?
That has not been determined yet. So
Okay.
the default is that measures would go on the November ballot. However, the governor has discretion to decide to place a measure on a different election and could put the measure on the August ballot.
I don't see any more questions, so we probably better let you get back to what you need to do for the day. Thank you so very much. This has been terrific.
Thanks so much for
Denise.
having
Very
me.
much appreciate all the
Claudia.
It's been great.
Look forward to having you all back next week. We're getting into our mayoral forums, so to get to know the people who, or some of the people, the first half of who's going to be running for mayor. So who is running?